Dubai has been stealing Africa's gold. Who is responsible for this well-planned theft? You're wrong if you believe it to be only one country. It was made available earlier today that at least 435 tons of gold were taken out of Africa illegally in 2022. 435 tons. That is over a metric ton of gold per day. Actually, a number of countries have united to steal Africa's wealth, and sadly, this has made them wealthy. Africa's economy is still mired in uncertainty. They take African gold and use it to establish empires, giving nothing in return. Who is actually in charge of everything? Let's investigate. Due to its abundant natural resources, Africa has long been exploited by outside forces. From the gloomy times of colonization to the current globalization period, people who claim ownership of Africa's riches have continuously depleted the continent's resources. To be taken. With its dazzling skyscrapers and opulent way of life, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, is at the center of a new chapter in this ancient tale. The unlawful exchange of gold. A startling $350 billion, or 93% of the illicit gold worth 435 tons that entered the United Arab Emirates in 2022, came from Africa. With merciless precision, this wealth, which accounts for 12% of global gold production and 40% of Africa's total, is being siphoned off. But this is not just the story of a single country's avarice. With a long history of plundering African resources, the West is a silent accomplice in this robbery, reaping the rewards of the stolen gold that passes through Dubai. When you consider the state of Africa's economy, everything begins to make sense. Ever ponder why? Africa's natural richness is enormous, but a large portion of its population still lives in poverty. The systemic resource extraction of Africa by foreign powers, a contemporary manifestation of the colonial mentality that has afflicted the continent for ages, is the answer. The illegal gold trade, which is led by the United Arab Emirates, is the most recent example of this exploitation. Nearly half of Africa's gold was illicitly exported in 2022, with Dubai acting as the entry point to international markets. The UAE plays a major part in this illicit commerce. Known as the City of Gold, Dubai has emerged as the global center for gold trading, drawing in merchants and investors from all over the world. But underneath all of the sparkle is a murky underbelly of exploitation, smuggling, and corruption. The gold that travels to Dubai is frequently extracted in Africa under hazardous and unethical conditions, evading laws and levies that might help the region. This goes beyond simple legal issues. It is a fundamentally moral matter that highlights the ongoing disparities that exist between Africa and the rest of the globe. To be clear though, this goes beyond the UAE. An important, although more subdued, part of this exploitation is played by the West. When gold is delivered to Dubai, it leaves. It then travels to Western markets, where it boosts economic growth and increases the wealth of multinational companies. The ultimate benefactors of this pilfered money are these firms, many of which have their headquarters in North America and Europe. They bought the gold, sometimes paying little attention to where it came from, and sold it for a big profit. It's a heavy irony. Nations that identify as champions of transparency and human rights are involved in a system that takes advantage of the people and resources of Africa. The method is sneaky. In Africa, simple gold is mined, frequently in small-scale artisanal operations. A significant portion of it is smuggled out to circumvent taxes and regulations rather than being processed and sold lawfully. After passing through several hands, the gold frequently ends up in Dubai, where loose laws make it simple to clean and sell the gold on the international market. Africa doesn't see any of the massive earnings. Instead, the illegal trade leaves the continent with devastation to the environment, social fragmentation, and economic poverty. All in all, there are several possible answers for why Africa isn't benefiting from its gold. The UAE, more especially Dubai, is at the core of this web and has grown to be a major global hub for gold trading. But the money doesn't stop there. The final benefactors are the Western countries and corporations that buy this gold, frequently without even considering where it came from. The irony is profound. Nations who profess to support openness and human rights are also parties to an exploitative system that takes advantage of the people and resources of Africa. Dubai plays a vital intermediary function by acting as a marketplace for the sale of illicit gold. The city makes it easier for riches to move from Africa to the West. The suffering and exploitation of African miners contribute to the city's opulent lifestyles and sparkling skyscrapers. But power is just as important as wealth. The West and its allies keep a tight grip on the world markets by managing the flow of gold. Africa is compelled to sell its resources for a little portion of their true value, keeping it in a dependent position while others profit. This abuse is closely linked to the Western banking system. The infrastructure that enables this gold to be traded on international markets is provided by banks and financial institutions, many of which are headquartered in North America and Europe. These organizations profit from the trade and take their share of the gains, obligingly ignoring the human cost. The wealth created by Africa's gold never returns to the continents, since the system is set up to serve the interests of the powerful. But the exploitation doesn't stop with the banks. The jewelry and electronics sectors are just two of the industries that employ the gold that makes it to Western markets. Global firms who are keen to satisfy customer demand ignore the source of their raw supplies. They don't see the need to pose tough questions as long as the gold keeps coming in. As a result, a global supply chain that functions under the cover of legitimacy, but is profoundly tarnished by exploitation and corruption, is created. It is impossible to ignore the part played by Western governments in this system. These states, who frequently support democracy and human rights, take part in the resource exploitation of Africa. They provide the framework for this illegal activity to thrive through trade agreements, foreign aid, and diplomatic ties. They supply the economic and legal structures that let companies take money out of Africa and give little to nothing back. Africa's gold has brought in enormous revenues, but very few people own most of them. The money made from this trade might be utilized to create hospitals and schools, invest in the future of the continent, and help millions of people escape poverty. Instead, it is diverted to foreign firms and banks, leaving Africa to bear the real costs of this global theft, which includes civil instability, environmental degradation, and economic inequality. How come the gold rush in Africa has been let to go unchecked for so long? The intricately designed political, economic, and legal systems that safeguard the interests of the wealthy and powerful hold the key to the solution. These structures were mostly created and maintained by the West, which has a long history of colonization and economic supremacy. The matter of legal frameworks comes first. Although many African nations have laws and regulations in place to safeguard their resources, outside pressure frequently undermines these measures. Western governments regularly incorporate provisions into international trade agreements that favor transnational firms at the expense of African countries. Due to these agreements, African nations find it more difficult to manage their resources and are compelled to sell their gold at rates set by the world market. Multinational firms wield significant influence in areas where Western interests predominate. These organizations have the ability to influence economic policies in their favor due to their enormous resources and worldwide influence. They advocate with governments, both domestically and internationally, to establish conducive environments for their business. In the name of profit, this frequently entails lowering taxes, eroding environmental rules, and suppressing labor rights. As a result, the local populace bears the costs of the system, while the wealth created by Africa's gold moves out of the continent. And there's the matter of political clout. Western countries have a long history of interfering in African politics, assisting and opposing governments that serve their interests. Because of this political meddling, African governments are unable to effectively oppose the exploitation of their resources and are instead forced to rely on international investment and aid. In order to maintain Africa's dependence and the uninterrupted supply of gold and other resources, the West exploits its economic and political might. The international community and diplomatic channels are frequently used to impose this political influence. African states are subjected to economic policies that put the needs of local inhabitants last and the interests of foreign investors first, imposed by Western nations through organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. These policies, which are frequently passed off as economic reforms, are actually instruments of economic control used to maintain the transfer of wealth from Africa to the West. The matter of information control comes last. Africa is frequently portrayed in Western media as a continent rife with conflict and corruption, with little attention paid to how foreign forces contribute to these issues. This story justifies the exploitation of Africa's resources by portraying it as an unavoidable evil in a region incapable of governing itself. But in actuality, foreign meddling rather than domestic flaws is frequently the cause of Africa's issues. The deeper realities concerning Africa's exploitation are hidden by the media's depiction of the continent as a place of instability and disarray. Western narratives conveniently avoid discussing the underlying causes of poverty, corruption, and conflict by concentrating on its symptoms, which are often entrenched in the very power structures that the West has created and continues to uphold. Because of this narrative control, the current state of affairs is maintained and the world's public is kept largely in the dark about the actual scope of Africa's exploitation and the involvement of Western powers in this ongoing theft. In conclusion, the framework that permits the mining of Africa's gold is not a historical accident. It's a purposefully designed structure that works for the powerful and against the common man. The foundations of this system include media control, economic dominance, political meddling, and legal manipulation. Together, these factors make sure that Africa continues to supply the globe with inexpensive resources, leaving the continent itself to bear the consequences. What transpires, therefore, when the riches of a continent is steadily taken away? Every area of life on the continent is impacted, and the effects are catastrophic and complex for Africa and its people. In addition to depriving Africa of its natural riches, the illicit gold trade worsens poverty, stirs up war, and devastates the environment. Africa is suffering fatalities as a result of the West's ravenous appetite for gold, with far-reaching effects. The effect on the environment is arguably the most obvious and direct. The production of illicit gold frequently comes from artisanal mining, which has a devastating negative impact on the ecosystem. To extract gold, miners utilize hazardous chemicals like cyanide and mercury, which contaminate soil, rivers, and entire ecosystems. In the process, rivers are redirected, woods are removed, and landscapes are scarred, leaving poisonous wastelands in place of once fertile soil. These environmental disasters affect the entire continent. They are not merely local problems. They also play a part in more significant problems like desertification, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Those who reside in these mining areas frequently experience hardships firsthand. Traditional livelihoods are destroyed, communities are uprooted, and water sources are tainted. The land that many formerly relied on for food, water, and shelter has turned into a toxic wasteland. These communities' health and well-being are directly impacted by the environmental destruction. For instance, the use of mercury in mining can result in birth deformities and other severe health issues, such as neurological damage. Water source contamination can cause diseases to spread, worsening the public health emergencies that many African countries currently experience. Beyond the damage to the environment, there are human costs associated with the illegal gold trade. Because the trade typically takes place in areas with lax enforcement of the law, armed groups, such as terrorist organizations and criminal syndicates, frequently control it. These organizations funded their operations primarily with gold mining earnings, which fueled hostilities and extended cycles of violence and instability. In addition to being a financial problem, the illegal gold trade poses a security risk to the stability of entire regions. This exploitation has equally detrimental effects on the economy. African governments are left with less money to invest in basic services like infrastructure, healthcare, and education as a result of the billions of lost tax revenue. This keeps Africa trapped in a cycle of underdevelopment and poverty, making it even more difficult for the continent to escape the clutches of foreign exploitation. Many African countries are unable to completely develop their economies due to a lack of investment in vital infrastructure, making them dependent on aid and investment from outside the continent. The illicit gold trade also tears apart the social fabric of many communities. The increase in wealth in these areas has the potential to exacerbate societal discontent by widening wealth gaps and dividing local groups. Trust and social cohesiveness are further undermined by the existence of armed groups and the ongoing threat of violence, making it challenging for communities to cooperate to improve their lot in life. Thus, the illicit gold trade not only devastates the natural world and the economy, but it also threatens the fundamental tenets of African civilization. It is a crime against humanity, as well as a moral transgression for the West to be involved in this exploitation. People who live on the continent bear the expenses of Africa's gold, while those in distant nations profit from it. This demonstrates blatantly how the global economic system is biased against Africa, which is why it is critical that the continent recover its resources and put them to the best use possible for its people. We'll discuss what can be done to reverse this trend and return Africa's wealth to its people in the concluding part. Is it possible to break free from this vicious cycle? Yes, but only if drastic measures are taken and the way that Africa's resources are handled is completely rethought. African countries need to take charge of their gold output as a first step. This entails stopping the raw gold export industry and putting money into regional refineries instead. African nations can retain a greater portion of the value of their resources, generate employment, and boost local economies by maintaining the refining process within their borders. Constructing regional refineries is about more than simply economics. It's about taking back control of Africa's natural riches. The continent has been subject to foreign powers dictating trade conditions for far too long through honing their gold, pricing control, supply chain management, and ensuring a greater percentage of revenues stay on the continent are all within the power of African governments. This is a critical step in ending the reliance loop that has maintained Africa's inferior status in the world economy. However, this is only the start. African countries must cooperate in order to renegotiate trade agreements so that they maintain sovereignty over their resources. This entails defying the West and declining to approve agreements that favor transnational firms at the expense of Africans. In order for Africa to negotiate for global trade, it also entails bolstering regional collaboration. Coordination of these initiatives and ensuring that Africa speaks with a single voice on the international scene are vital tasks for institutions such as the African Union, AU. In the gold trade, there is also a demand for increased accountability and openness. African governments need to take a tough stance against corruption and make sure that the general populace, not just a select few, benefits from gold mining earnings. Strong institutions capable of enforcing the laws and solid legal frameworks are needed for this. It also needs the backing of civil society, which is responsible for holding businesses and governments responsible for their deeds. Openness can be aided by programs such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EIT, which makes sure that the money extracted from Africa's resources is put to good use. There is a need for a more significant change in how the world views Africa in addition to these domestic initiatives. The West needs to understand that Africa is a continent with enormous potential, not a helpless situation. This entails putting a stop to the condescending narratives that view Africa as an issue that needs to be resolved and acknowledging it as a partner that can contribute significantly to the global economy. The overuse of Africa's resources is a worldwide issue that needs a global response. It is not only an African issue. Reforming the global financial system to make it more just and equitable is one aspect of this approach. Additionally, Western banks and financial institutions need to answer for their assistance in the illegal gold trade. This can entail tougher laws, more thorough inspections, and heavier punishments for individuals who participate in or assist with unlawful activity. The global community must also oppose tax havens and other legal loopholes that enable businesses to conceal their earnings and evade paying their fair share of taxes. The world can guarantee that more of Africa's riches remains on the continent where it belongs by plugging these loopholes. Ultimately, a fresh worldwide movement calling for justice for Africa is required. Global governments, civil society organizations, and activists must unite in this movement to demand a fairer allocation of the world's resources. It must demand that the global economy be rebuilt to benefit everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful, and it must confront the power structures that have held Africa in a dependent position for so long. This goes beyond simple equity. It has to do with surviving. The entire globe will suffer if the world keeps using Africa's resources without thinking about the repercussions. Africa needs to take control of its own destiny and cease acting as the world's ATM. Africa has the ability to rewrite the history, even though the West has benefited from its resources for ages. It's time to put that power to use and make sure that justice, prosperity, and empowerment mark the next chapter in the tale of Africa's gold. Do you believe that instead of viewing Africa as a free resource bank, countries should start viewing it as a partner? What must Africa do for these countries to treat Africa fairly? Should Africa isolate itself from them? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.